Today's lesson is on Chapter 1, Section 3, A History of Psychology. Alright, so what was the first psychological study according to Greek historian Herodotus? It was the first recorded psychological study in history took place in Egypt in the later half of the 1600s BC. The king of Egypt at the time wanted to prove that the Egyptian civilization was the oldest on earth. And to test this hypothesis, the king selected two babies from lower class family and gave them over to the care of a local shepherd. Now, the shepherd was given strict instructions to treat the children well, but to never speak a word to them. The king believed that without any prompting, the children would naturally speak what he considered to be the original, most ancient language of humankind, which he thought to be Egyptian. Unfortunately, the king's hypothesis proved false, and when the children were about 2 years old, the shepherd reported that they had uttered a sound, but the sound that the children uttered was just babbling. But the king was greatly encouraged. It turned out um, they weren't even speaking Egyptian. It wasn't even an Egyptian word. It was a different language that they were speaking, and they said it. They spoke the word bread. The heartbroken king, once he found out, he was heartbroken, and he came to the conclusion that the Egyptians weren't the most ancient people. It was these other people called the Fibergains. But today, of course, we know that the children um, who were not exposed to speech will not spontaneously speak any language at all, much less Egyptian. However, the king did question the minds and how it works. And the focus would be the psychological studies for the next 2,600 years. All right, ancient Greece, more than 2,000 years ago, Plato, he was a student of the great philosopher Socrates in ancient Greece, um, recorded his teacher's advice, know thyself. This phrase has remained an important motto of a psychological study ever since, and Socrates suggested that we can learn much about ourselves by carefully examining our own thoughts and feelings. Psychologists call this method of learning introspection, which means looking within. Have you ever looked within your mind? One of Plato's students and a Greek philosopher, Aristotle, raised many questions about human behavior that are still being discussed today. Aristotle outlined the laws of associationism, which are still at the heart of learning theory more than 2,000 years later. He showed how experiences often remind us of similar experiences in the past and how we face loved ones makes us feel secure, and how thought leads to ideas as we dream and as we daydream. Who daydreams here? I do. I daydream all the time. One of Aristotle's works was called About the Mind. And this book explored topics such as sensation, perception, thought, intelligence, needs, motives, feelings, emotions, and memories. So he was thinking pretty deeply back in the day. This was 2,000 years ago. And this guy was thinking about things that people think about today or question today. All right. However, the Greek physician Hippocrates, I don't even know if I'm saying his name right, but I'm trying. He rejected these beliefs. This guy was a famous physician. He's been brought up in history multiple times. He suggested that problems are caused by abnormalities, so things that aren't right in the brain. In the brain, And they had rational explanations, meaning they had a simple answer to them. This idea that biological factors can affect our thoughts, feelings, and behavior influence thinking about psychology for the more than 2,000 years. So, the idea of biological factors can affect our thoughts and feelings. This guy came up with this idea 2,000 years ago. And we learned about this in our previous section, the difference between biological and psychological needs. All right. Greek thinking. All right, the Middle Ages. Greek thinking about the human mind was lost during the Middle Ages. Most Europeans of this period believed that problems such as confusion were signs of possession by demons. Oh, that's crazy. A popular belief at the time was that possession was punishment for sins or the result of deals that those affected had made with the devil. Those afflicted had made with the devil. So that's what possession is. You make a deal with the devil, um, and an evil spirit gets in you, and you can't control them. Certain tests were used to determine whether a person was possessed. Aha, here we go. The water float test. This was used in the Salem witch trials. Individuals who were suspected of being possessed were thrown into deep water. Suspects who managed to keep their heads above water were assumed to be impure and in league with the devil. They were judged to be guilty, and they were executed for associating themselves with the devil. Those who sank to the bottom, on the other hand, well, if they sank, that means they were pure, and they were not in cahoots with the devil. But unfortunately, they met a grim end by drowning. So regardless, if you were suspected of being a witch, or being suspected of being possessed, if you will, you would have been subjugated to this water flow test, and that pretty much means you're dead because you're going to be thrown into a river and tied down onto a chair. Good luck with that. Pioneers of psychology, people in the 1500s and 1600s and the 1700s witnessed great scientific and advances. Intellectual advances. In the 1500s, for example, Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus challenged a widely held view that the sun revolved around the earth, suggesting instead that earth revolves around the sun. Well, we all know that he was true. In the 1600s, English scientist Sir Isaac Newton formulated the laws of gravity and motion. English philosopher John Locke, building on the principles of associationism, theorized that knowledge is not inborn but is learned from experience. These are all things that are very good theories and have been proven to be true, actually. And in the late 1700s, French scientist Lavoisier founded the science of chemistry and explained how animals and plants use oxygen in respiration, so how we breathe. And there's a picture of English scientist Sir Isaac Newton studying an apple falling from a tree, proving that gravity and its laws of motion. Okay, let's talk about some famous psychologists. Wilhelm Wundt was a structuralist, and they were concerned with discovering basic elements of consciousness. Then you had William James, and he maintained that experience is consciousness, or it's a stream of consciousness. James was one of the founders of the school of functionalism, and functionalists were concerned with how mental processes, or how we think, help organisms adapt to their environment. The structuralists, like Wilhelm Wundt, they tended to ask what are the elements of psychological processes, and functionalists, on the other hand, tend to ask What are the purposes of behavior and mental processes? All right. Another famous psychologist was Sigmund Freud, and his theory was psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis emphasized the importance of unconscious motives and internal conflicts in determining and understanding human behavior. All right, so you're probably familiar with several of Sigmund Freud's concepts. For example, have you ever tried to interpret a tip of the tongue moment, or if you ever tried to figure out the meaning of something that you dreamed, this is what Sigmund Freud studied. And he believed that the ideas of people are driven by hidden impulses. He also encouraged people to talk about their problems, a method that came to be called the talking cure. I do this all the time. When I'm frustrated with something or I'm angry, I usually talk to my wife about it and get my emotions out. Sometimes this makes it worse. Um, Freud's theory, which was called psychodynamic thinking, assumed that most of what exists in an individual's mind is unconscious and consists of conflicting impulses, urges, and wishes. So, most of the stuff that goes on in your mind are things that you're probably not going to act on or do, is what he's saying. Or they might just be conflicting things in your head that you want to do, but you're not sure you should do it. I know, all very confusing stuff. All right, the modern developments in psychology. All right, so John B. Watson, here's another psychologist, and he came up with the idea of behavioralism, and he saw consciousness as a private event known only to the individual, so only you know about it. The founder of the school, behavioralism, Watson defined psychology as a scientific study of observable behavior. Watson once famously claimed that he could take a group of healthy children and train them to become doctors or lawyers or any other kind of specialist. That might be kind of tough. With this claim, Watson laid the foundation of his classic behavior belief. Regardless of who we think we really are inside, we can totally be conditioned by external events, so we can learn to be something else. Another famous psychologist was B.F. Skinner, and he really emphasized the idea of reinforcement. Harvard University psychologist B.F. Skinner added to the behavioralist tradition by introducing the concept of reinforcing. Um, if you get your classroom work done, or if you get your assignment done, you can leave class early. That would be a type of reinforcement. I'm reinforcing you with something. I'm saying if you do this, you can have this. Um, I use reinforcement with my daughter all the time. I say if you do this, this, and this, I'll give you a piece of candy. Sometimes it might be known as bribery, but I see it as positive reinforcement. All right, the Gestalt practice, which means shape or form in German, is based on the idea that our perceptions of objects are more than sums of their parts. Rather, they are wholes that give shape or meaning to the parts. So basically, what that means is take a look at this picture and tell me what you see. Do you see two girls looking at each other? Or do you see a vase or a, a cup, if you will? If you focus on the white, you will see the cup. If you focus on the black, you will see two girls looking at each other. I see them both. Or this one. Do you see a musician? Or do you see the girl's face? Here are the eyes right here. Here's the nose and here's the mouth. I see a girl's face. But if you look at the musician, this is the dude's hair, his big nose, and he's playing a saxophone. I see them both. All right, another theory or another part to this uh, Gestalt theory or Gestalt principle, if you will, is closure. And if you look at this panda, you know it's a panda, and this is the closure, the principle of closure. You're closing the gaps that aren't there. As you can see, I'm closing the gap, but your mind can already pick that up, so you don't have to actually see those lines. All right, so that's your lesson for today. I know it was a long one. Thanks for hanging in there. Peace out.